The fog rolled off the English Channel that February morning of 1943, silvering the airfield at RAF Herne. On the tarmac stood a peculiar mosquito, its slender wooden nose replaced by a gaping snout of steel. Mechanics in oil-stained overalls moved carefully around it, whispering to one another as if standing near some volatile creature. They had seen mosquitoes with bombs, rockets, even cameras, but never one with the blunt, gunned face of a tank hunter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Squadron Leader Jeffrey Tyson, one of the test pilots from the Aeroplane and Armament Experimental Establishment at Boscombe Down, gave it a pat as if steadying a restless horse. "Gentlemen," he said to the small crowd of engineers, "you've given a thoroughbred a set of elephant tusks." Inside that steel nose sat the new Mollins 57mm cannon, an adaptation of the British Army's 6-pounder anti-tank gun, fitted with a mechanical autoloader developed by the Mollins Machine Company. The idea was simple but audacious. Take a weapon capable of piercing armor at 1,000 yards and mount it in the fastest twin-engine aircraft of the war. The Mosquito, with its plywood fuselage and twin Merlin engines, could streak over 360 miles per hour, too quick for most enemy interceptors, yet nimble enough to deliver a pinpoint strike. It was Wing Commander William or Bill Olton of RAF Coastal Command who championed the concept. The Battle of the Atlantic had reached a desperate rhythm. German U-boats prowled in wolf packs, surfacing at night to charge batteries and ambush convoys. Standard bomb loads or depth charges often lacked the precision to cripple a surfaced submarine before it dove. Rockets were still being refined. What was needed, Olton argued, was a cannon, one capable of punching through a pressure hull with a single surgical hit. De Havilland engineers faced immediate headaches. The recoil alone, 20,000 pounds of force, could snap the Mosquito's wooden frame like a matchstick if not distributed properly. Reinforced spars, mounting brackets, and shock absorbers had to be integrated into the nose. The barrel projected nearly 6 feet ahead of the fuselage, affecting aerodynamics and trim. Even with the autoloader, only 25 shells could be carried, each weighing nearly 6 pounds. Flight tests were both thrilling and terrifying. When the trigger was pulled, the entire aircraft lurched backward, the nose dipping as the recoil bled through the airframe. Tyson described it later in his report. The effect is akin to flying into an invisible wall, though she recovers smartly enough. Accuracy is good within 500 yards. Beyond that, recoil oscillation and vibration reduce precision. Still, the results were promising. The 57mm shell tore through armor plate, destroyed concrete targets, and shattered mock submarine conning towers at test ranges. It gave Coastal Command something it never possessed, a gunship able to kill a U-boat before it could dive. By late summer 1943, the first operational version, the Mosquito Mark 18, was ready. The crews, many from 248 Squadron, nicknamed it Tsetse after the deadly African fly. Small, fast, and armed with a stinger that could kill far larger prey. A sting in the sky, Olton called it during the briefing at RAF Banff. At the National Archives today, yellowing memos from the Air Ministry record the early skepticism. One commander wrote, "The concept is inventive but tactically dubious. An aircraft must close head-on to employ the weapon, exposing itself to heavy flak." Olton's reply was curt. "Speed and surprise will suffice. The Mosquito needs no escort." By late summer 1943, the Tsetse was flying operationally along the Bay of Biscay. Its pilots hunted U-boats and small Axis merchant vessels that hugged the French coast. Early missions proved the weapon's worth. An aircraft could engage from 1,200 yards outside most deck gun range and still penetrate hull plating. The RAF's experiment had succeeded. Yet in secret planning rooms, British and American strategists wondered whether the same concept, Fast, heavy-gunned aircraft striking from beyond anti-aircraft belts could find use elsewhere. Far to the east, in the vast waters of the Pacific, Japanese shipping lanes stretched unguarded for hundreds of miles. No one yet imagined that a few of these wooden, cannon-armed mosquitoes might one day turn their stings on targets Japan thought unreachable. The Tsetse's story had only begun. The dawn of November 7, 1943, came low and gray over the Bay of Biscay. The North Atlantic wind dragged mist across the surface like gauze, and beneath that pale sky, the RAF's most unusual strike force prepared for its first true test. At RAF Pretanac, on the Cornish coast, the 248 squadron crews of Coastal Command stood over steaming mugs of tea, poring over reconnaissance photos spread across a wooden table. Intelligence from Bletchley Park had intercepted a German naval transmission. U-boat U-976 was expected to surface for a mid-morning recharge. Its coordinates placed it squarely inside the range of the new Mosquito Mark 18 Tsetse. Flight Lieutenant Tony Phillips, a compact man with the lean look of a fencer, ran a gloved finger along the course line. "We go in here, wave top. If he's surfaced, he'll have his 20 millimeters ready, but if we stay low, we'll be under his traverse arc." His navigator, Pilot Officer Derek Lang, nodded, flipping through checklists. 25 rounds, one every 2 seconds. Let's hope we won't need them all. Above them, the ground crew rolled out the silver-gray Tsetse. Its 57mm cannon jutted proudly from the nose, a weapon more at home on a tank than on a twin-engine aircraft. The crews nicknamed her Flying Six-Pounder. A Molin's autoloader sat behind the breech, cycling each massive shell with mechanical precision. The smell of aviation fuel mixed with the sharp scent of gun oil. At 0900 hours, the engines roared alive. 4 mosquitoes lifted into the mist, their twin merlins whining in unison. The Atlantic opened beneath them, streaked with whitecaps. For half an hour they flew nap of the sea, radar off, conserving surprise. Then, at 0942, Lang's voice cracked through the intercom. "Contact, bearing 21 degrees, conning tower dead ahead." Through the drifting haze, Phillips saw it, a long gray hull slicing the waves, a white wake trailing behind. Men were on deck, unaware of what was approaching. The Mosquito dropped to 50 feet, racing toward the U-boat. "Guns armed," Lang reported. Phillips leveled the aircraft, the nose shaking slightly as he aligned the cannon sight. He squeezed the trigger. The first 57mm shell left the barrel with a deafening crack. The recoil jolted the airframe so hard it felt like a physical punch. Then another round, and another. Boom, 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 each shot spaced by the rhythm of the autoloader. Water erupted around the U-boat's hull, columns of spray rising like geysers. The third shell struck home. A plume of smoke and seawater burst from the U-boat's foredeck. Men scrambled for the hatch. Phillips fired again. One shell slammed through the conning tower, another ripped along the pressure hull. Within seconds, the U-boat began to list, stern rising. On deck, the German gunners tried to swing their 20mm mounts around, but the Mosquito had already broken away, racing low and eastward. Phillips glanced back once. The submarine was half submerged, foam boiling over its hatches. Back at base, debriefing officers crowded the crew room. The Tsetse's gun camera film left no doubt. U-976 had been fatally hit. Later reports confirmed the kill. The weapon had worked beyond expectations. In the weeks that followed, the Tsetse's legend spread quietly across Coastal Command. Pilots spoke of its destructive power in half-awed tones. At Banff and Lucius, other squadrons clamored to try it. The Mosquito's natural stability and high speed made it ideal for the straight-line attack that the 57mm demanded. By early 1944, the Tsetse was hunting in packs. U-boats that once surfaced boldly now did so in fear. One pilot described the effect in his log. "You could see them panic, half their crew diving below while the deck guns fired wildly. A few seconds later, one good hit and they were gone."
Yet the new weapon revealed its flaws too. The Mosquito had to steady itself for accurate fire, exposing it to flak. The cannon's blast sometimes shattered perspex panels. Maintenance crews cursed the recoil that cracked mounts and loosened rivets. Every mission meant re-sighting the gun, recalibrating the optics, cleaning the breech from salt residue. Still, results mattered most. In 3 months, Coastal Command's Tsetses sank or crippled more submarines than any single small bomber type. Their success forced German captains to dive at the first radar ping, abandoning nighttime surface attacks entirely. For the RAF, the experiment was vindicated. The 57mm Mosquito had turned theory into lethal practice, and while few realized it yet, word of its success reached beyond Europe, across oceans and intelligence desks, where Allied planners fighting Japan began to wonder, if it could destroy a U-boat, what could it do to a destroyer? The next battleground would not be the gray Atlantic, but the wide, sunburnt Pacific. By the spring of 1944, the Mosquito Tsetse had carved a small but undeniable legend along Europe's stormy coasts. The Bay of Biscay, once a refuge for U-boats, had become a death trap where sleek wooden predators struck without warning. Reports from RAF Banff and St. Evell piled high in Air Ministry files. Successful attacks, confirmed sinkings, and a rising fear among
German skippers who now called the Mosquito der fliegende Panzerbrecher, the flying tank buster. At first, few beyond the Atlantic Command took notice. But in Washington and Honolulu, where Allied planners pored over charts of Pacific shipping routes, whispers began. The Royal Navy's liaison officers in Ceylon forwarded summaries of the Tsetse's trials to the U.S. Pacific Fleet Air Staff. Buried in a March 1944 memorandum, a single line caught the attention of Admiral Nimitz's intelligence aide. Effective range of 57mm gunfire exceeds 1,200 yards. Potential for attacks beyond light anti-aircraft flak envelope. That sentence sparked a question. Could such a gunship concept, designed to pierce German submarines, also threaten Japanese shipping in the island-strewn Pacific? The idea reached the desks of 13th Fighter Command and the 5th Air Force in New Guinea by summer. American airmen were already experimenting with their own heavy hitters, the 75mm cannon-armed B-25G and H. Mitchells, used in low-level attacks on Japanese barges and destroyers. These gunships had proven devastating at close range, but required head-on runs through curtains of tracer fire. The Mosquito, by contrast, promised something else: speed, precision, and an uncanny ability to hit from beyond the flak zone. In London, representatives from the Air Ministry and the U.S. Army Air Forces met to discuss the matter. The minutes of that meeting survive in the U.S. National Archives, Record Group 18. One colonel from the Air Technical Service Command put it bluntly: if the Tsetse can fire accurately past 1,000 yards, she could sink an escort before the Japanese know she's there. But there were challenges. The Mosquito was a creature of Europe's temperate climate. Its plywood skin, layers of birch and balsa bound with casein glue, was vulnerable to tropical humidity. British engineers warned that in New Guinea or the Solomons, the joints might swell, delaminate, or warp. Replacement parts were scarce, and the 57mm shells themselves were unique to the Molin's cannon. Shipping them halfway across the world was no small feat. Still, the theoretical promise was too intriguing to ignore. Intelligence from the U.S. Navy's Pacific Section noted that Japanese convoys, particularly between Singapore and Formosa, often sailed under light escort, 2 or 3 destroyers protecting half a dozen transports. These ships relied on dense, short-range flak belts to deter dive bombers and torpedo planes. None expected to be engaged by direct cannon fire from over a mile away. In May 1944, the RAF Coastal Command forwarded operational data to the Allied Technical Air Translation Office in Brisbane. The memo bore a dry title, Employment of Heavy-Caliber Aircraft Armament in Anti-Shipping Role, but its conclusions were bold. The Mosquito Mark 18, employing Molin's 57mm gun, demonstrated capacity to penetrate 2-inch deck plating at 1,200 yards, capable of damage equivalent to a 100-pound bomb with greater precision. Further trials recommended under Pacific conditions. Those Pacific conditions were no small obstacle. Mechanics officers feared tropical decay, and logistics planners doubted any squadron could sustain such specialized aircraft so far from Britain. Yet by August, a decision was quietly made. 2 disassembled Tsetse Mosquitoes would be crated, shipped through the Suez Canal to India, and from there ferried to the Royal Air Force Detachment at Darwin, Australia. There, under Joint Commonwealth Command, they would undergo tropical trials. For the Japanese, unaware of these deliberations, the war at sea continued under familiar assumptions. They braced for B-25 strafers, P-38 dive attacks, and B-24 bomb runs, but not for a wooden aircraft firing tank shells from beyond their defensive arc. Their intelligence analysts, poring over after-action reports from the Bay of Biscay, had dismissed the Tsetse as a niche European oddity. Unsuitable for Pacific operations, one Imperial Navy officer wrote. He would not remain confident for long. By the end of that year, as Allied naval powers surged across the Philippines and into the South China Sea, 2 strange aircraft would arrive on a sun-baked runway at Darwin, sleek, pale, and deadly. Their mission was to test whether the flying tank buster could reach across an ocean and rewrite the rules of ship-killing warfare once more. The Pacific, vast and unguarded, was about to meet the sting of the Tsetse. The first 2 Mosquito Mark 18s, serial numbers NS519 and NT202, arrived at Darwin in late December 1944, packed like precious cargo in the hold of a British freighter. Created in sections, the aircraft's pale birch fuselages were hoisted onto the dock beneath a merciless Australian sun. As the humidity pressed in, ground crews from the Royal Australian Air Force looked on skeptically. One sergeant muttered, "She's made of wood, for God's sake. She'll melt before she fights." But these were not ordinary wooden planes. Each had been treated with a layer of antifungal resin, reinforced for the tropics by engineers at de Havilland. When reassembled, the Mosquitoes gleamed like ivory birds against the coral sand. The long black snout of the 57mm Molin's cannon looked almost absurd on such a sleek frame, a mix of grace and brutality that fascinated everyone who saw it. Flight Lieutenant Peter Henshaw, a veteran of the North Sea patrols, led the small detachment. His logbook bore the simple note, "Arrived at Darwin, Mosquito Tsetse trial. Humidity 98%, aircraft sweating like a horse." Within days, both planes were moved to a forward airstrip outside Fenton, south of Darwin, where the Allied Technical Air Intelligence Unit had established test facilities. Here, under the combined supervision of RAF and USAF officers, tropical trials began. Mechanics spent hours drying glue seams with portable heaters, checking for warping along the wing spars, and recalibrating the Molin's autoloader. The cannon's feed system, so reliable in the cold, dry air of Britain, jammed repeatedly in the sticky Pacific heat.
The first flight took place on January 5, 1945. Henshaw lifted NS-519 off the strip and circled high over the jungle canopy. The Merlin engines howled, but the airframe held. Over the radio he called, "Handling good, bit sluggish in roll. Cannon recoils within limits." The base commander, an American colonel named Jack Morgan, turned to his adjutant. "If that thing really fires straight, it'll scare the pants off Tokyo." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Trials over the Arafura Sea confirmed the weapon's potential. From 1,200 yards, shells slammed through the rusting hull of a captured Japanese coaster anchored as a target. The first shot hit high, the second amidships. Observers aboard a nearby launch felt the concussion ripple through the water. One recorded in his notebook, "Shells punched clean through both sides of the hull, exit holes fist wide, would sink a transport in under a minute." Word spread fast through the Allied air community. U.S. officers from the 5th Air Force visited to watch the gunnery runs. The Mosquito's ability to deliver pinpoint fire without entering the flak umbrella fascinated them. Colonel Morgan wrote to Pacific Fleet headquarters. Weapon allows engagement of shipping from outside expected AA radius. In suitable weather, single aircraft could harass convoys without bomb load. By February, the British-Australian detachment received permission for operational trials. Intelligence had reported a small Japanese convoy, 2 transports escorted by a minesweeper, making a night run from Timor toward Borneo. It was lightly defended, relying on old Type 96 and Type 98 automatic guns. Perfect prey for an experiment. At dusk, the 2 Tsetses took off from Fenton, each with 25 shells and full fuel. They climbed east, then turned northwest toward the Java Sea. At 4,000 feet, the world below was black water streaked with moonlight. Henshaw's navigator spotted faint glows on the horizon, convoy lights shielded behind canvas hoods. "Target dead ahead, range 2 miles," he said. Henshaw descended to 1,500 feet and leveled out. The minesweepers' lookouts never saw them coming. From 1,200 yards, Henshaw lined up the lead ship and squeezed the trigger. The Tsetse shuddered as the Molin's cannon spat flame. The first shell missed, the second struck near the stern. An orange blossom of fire bloomed. Japanese gunners swung their flak upward, but their arcs fell short. The Mosquito broke left, banking hard, the wooden wings flexing with the recoil's memory. Behind it, the second Tsetse opened fire, scoring 2 hits along the waterline. Within minutes, 1 transport was dead in the water, listing sharply. The minesweeper turned back to rescue survivors. The Mosquitoes, untouched, sped east into the dark. Back at Darwin, Henshaw's report was brief but electric. Engaged from beyond effective flak range, 1 confirmed sinking, 1 probable. Aircraft performance satisfactory. In Tokyo, weeks later, Japanese analysts puzzled over intercepted Allied signals describing airborne gunfire at extreme range. They dismissed it as exaggeration. Surely no aircraft could fire shells that heavy with precision and live to tell of it. They were wrong. The Tsetse had arrived in the Pacific, and Japan's convoys had just met the wooden predator they never expected. By March 1945, the Japanese naval staff in Singapore had begun receiving scattered, uneasy reports from their supply convoys. Captains described sudden strikes at long range, piercing hits from unseen attackers that tore through steel hulls before the gunners could even sight a target. In the war diaries of the 4th Air Group, one officer wrote, "Shells struck from above the sea line. No bomb fragments were recovered. Enemy aircraft not sighted. Possibly naval gunfire from a distant cruiser?" There was no cruiser, only 2 wooden aircraft prowling the night. At Fenton Field, the Tsetse Flight, as it came to be known, had settled into a rhythm of operations. Led by Flight Lieutenant Peter Jock Henshaw and Flying Officer Derek Lang, the tiny unit conducted dusk and dawn patrols along the Java Sea routes. They flew low, hugging the waves to avoid radar, then climbed to firing altitude once a convoy was sighted. Each sortie carried just 25 rounds of 57mm ammunition, enough for 1 attack run. The weapon's range, over 1,200 yards, allowed the Mosquitoes to open fire from beyond the effective envelope of Japanese 25mm Type 96 flak. But even so, the missions demanded precision and nerve. 1 second too long in the firing line, and a lucky shell could shred a wing or engine nacelle. Their second major strike came on the night of March 18, 1945. Allied intelligence had tracked a convoy departing Balikpapan for Surabaya, 2 oil tankers and 3 escorts. The Mosquitoes launched at 1940 under a rising moon. At 2010 hours, Lang's radar operator picked up faint returns. Multiple targets bearing 07 degrees, convoy in line formation. The aircrew split, approaching from opposite sides. Henshaw's Mosquito attacked first, firing from 1,300 yards. The shells walked across the sea, each splashed closer, until 1 struck true. A white burst flared amidships on the lead tanker. Seconds later, another hit followed, and a column of black smoke rose into the night. Japanese gunners swung their flak upward, but their arcs fell short. The Mosquito broke left, banking hard, the wooden wings flexing with the recoil's memory. Behind it, the second Tsetse opened fire, scoring 2 hits along the waterline. By morning, reconnaissance confirmed the kill. 1 tanker sunk, another severely damaged, and the escort beached on a reef. The Japanese survivors swore they had been attacked by multiple heavy bombers. The truth, a pair of wooden aircraft firing anti-tank shells from beyond the horizon, seemed unbelievable. Within Allied command, the success sent ripples of excitement. Reports forwarded to 13 Fighter Command called the Mosquito's performance exceptional. One line from a U.S. Navy intelligence summary dated March 22 noted, "The weapon appears capable of engaging at longer ranges than any existing aircraft gun," considered a psychological as well as material threat. But success carried a cost. The Tsetse was a temperamental beast. After each sortie, maintenance crews spent hours realigning the cannon, cleaning the feed trays, and replacing cracked mounts. Tropical moisture corroded the autoloader's delicate mechanism, and spare parts were scarce. By April, NS-519 had developed hairline fractures in its forward bulkhead from cumulative recoil stress. Still, the pilots pressed on. The more the Japanese adapted, the more elusive the Mosquitoes became. Convoys began sailing at night under strict blackout, but the Tsetses simply used moonlight and reflections to find them. Escorts deployed heavier flak, yet the Mosquitoes stayed beyond its reach. For weeks, Japanese lookouts reported invisible gunfire, explosions erupting along hulls without visible aircraft. At the 1962 U.S.-Japanese Aviation History Symposium, a former Imperial Navy officer recalled his confusion. "We believed we were attacked by American rockets, perhaps launched from submarines. We had no record of British aircraft in those waters." The effect on morale was striking. Merchant captains begged for fighter cover, escort commanders doubled lookouts. Every ripple of phosphorescent surf at night looked like a torpedo wake. Back at Darwin, Henshaw's men joked that they'd become phantoms of the Java Sea. Yet privately they knew how fragile their success was. They only had 2 operational aircraft, dwindling ammunition, and no replacement parts. Each mission risked losing an irreplaceable machine. By late April, the Japanese began assigning A6M Zeros to convoy overwatch. The Mosquito's speed gave it a chance to escape, but one lucky interception could end the experiment for good. For now, the Tsetse Flight remained undefeated, an invisible terror that struck from beyond Flak, then vanished into the humid dark. And in Tokyo, the Imperial Navy's analysts struggled to answer a question that had begun to haunt every convoy report. What kind of plane fires a cannon that large, yet flies like a shadow? By May 1945, the Tsetse Flight had achieved an almost mythical reputation among Allied intelligence circles in the Southwest Pacific. Officially, it did not exist. Its missions were folded into general reconnaissance summaries or labeled as photo patrols. Yet their results were unmistakable. In 6 weeks, Japanese convoys along the Banda Sea and the approaches to Makassar Strait had suffered disproportionate losses. Tankers holed, escorts crippled, barges left burning on the tide. The Japanese Naval Command in Surabaya had issued standing orders. Expect long-range gunfire from unidentified aircraft, defensive formation to tighten on sighting tracer shells. But that warning did little good. The Mosquito Tsetses always struck from unexpected angles, using geography and moonlight like camouflage. What the Japanese couldn't see, they couldn't shoot. On May 14, 1945, an intercepted radio transmission from Japanese Naval Air Group 954 reported a fuel convoy departing Ambon to Surabaya, 4 merchantmen escorted by the destroyer Kawakaze. The Allies wanted that convoy stopped. Henshaw's small detachment was tasked to do it. At 18:20 hours, the 2 Tsetses, Henshaw in NS-519 and Lang in NS-522, took off from Fenton under moonless skies. They flew east for nearly 3 hours, skimming the water at less than 200 feet. The air was heavy with salt and humidity, and the only light came from the phosphorescence of the sea beneath them. At 21:40 hours, Lang's navigator picked up faint radar echoes. The convoy 12 miles ahead, moving north at 9 knots. Henshaw ordered a wide flanking approach. The Mosquitoes rose to 2,000 feet, just high enough to bring the cannon to bear without drawing fire from the escorts. Range, 1,300 yards, Henshaw called over the intercom. Steady, firing. The 57mm Mullins gun barked once, the recoil thundering through the airframe. Then again. 2 shells streaked toward the lead ship, a tanker loaded with aviation fuel. The first splashed wide, the second struck near the stern. A flash erupted, followed by a sheet of fire that climbed 50 feet into the air. Lang attacked next, targeting the escort destroyer. His first burst shattered the bridge area. The second sent the destroyer veering off course, her searchlights swinging wildly into the darkness. By the time Japanese gunners began to fire back, both Mosquitoes had vanished. The after-action report, compiled by 13 Fighter Command's liaison office, summarized the outcome succinctly. 2 tankers and 1 escort were confirmed destroyed or abandoned. No Allied losses. Engagement time, 90 seconds.
But behind the clean statistics lay exhaustion. Each sortie strained both men and machines. The 57mm cannon, though deadly, generated massive recoil stress. Rivets loosened, instruments shook loose, and after each flight, armorers spent hours recalibrating the mounting. Supply lines were thin, ammunition had to be shipped by sea from Brisbane, and spare parts for the Mullins gun were almost impossible to obtain. When the unit's ground chief, Warrant Officer Michael Cragg, examined NS-519 after the May 14th sortie, he found a fine web of cracks forming around the cannon bulkhead. "She's splitting at the seams," he told Henshaw bluntly. "Another few runs and she'll come apart." Henshaw merely nodded. He knew the odds. But he also knew that every convoy sunk meant fewer supplies feeding the Japanese war machine. With Borneo under assault and the Philippines liberated, Japan's southern resource lifeline was crumbling. For the Japanese sailors who faced the phantom attackers, the terror was psychological as much as physical. Survivors' interrogations after the war described single hits that pierced entire hulls and aircraft that attacked without sound or light. Some believed the Allies had developed remote-controlled planes armed with automatic cannons. By June 1945, Imperial Navy reports listed the Mosquito among the most feared Allied aircraft in the Pacific, alongside the B-29 and the Corsair. Yet very few Japanese airmen ever saw one. At Fenton, the Tsetse crews received word of reassignment. The war was entering its final act. Tokyo was burning and Allied bombers ruled the skies. Henshaw's detachment had proven its point. A wooden British aircraft armed with a tank cannon could reach farther and hit harder than anyone imagined. On their final mission over the Banda Sea, Henshaw and Lang flew in silence. Below them, the ocean shimmered faintly with moonlight. No targets appeared, only the endless horizon. "Strange," Lang muttered over the radio. "Feels like the sea's empty now." Henshaw smiled faintly. "Maybe that's the point." The Phantom had done its work and vanished into history's twilight. By July 1945, the Tsetse Mosquito detachment at Fenton Airfield was living on borrowed time. The men knew it, and so did their machines. The Pacific War had shifted northward toward Okinawa and the home islands, leaving their theater, once vital to stopping Japanese southern oil convoys, largely abandoned. But remnants of the Japanese merchant fleet still crept through the Java Sea, clinging to survival under cover of darkness. Flight Lieutenant Peter Henshaw and Flying Officer Derek Lang, the last 2 operational Tsetse pilots in the Far East, had been ordered to stand by for reassignment. Yet before they left, 13th Fighter Command requested one final sortie, a patrol over the Makassar Strait
where Allied signal intelligence had detected renewed shipping activity. It would be their last mission. At dawn on July 8, 1945, the two Mosquitoes rolled down the Fenton runway, their Merlin engines snarling in unison. The humidity was thick enough to taste. Even at takeoff, condensation streamed across the canopy. Below, the mechanics watched silently, aware that neither aircraft might return. Convoy sighted, bearing 06, Lang's navigator reported 2 hours later, his voice calm but clipped. 4 merchant ships, small escort, no air cover. Henshaw checked his instruments. The cannon's autoloader cycled smoothly, rare for the battered NS-519. "All right," he said, "we'll go in from opposite flanks. Remember, stay long range, let the 57 do the talking." They descended to 50 feet above the water, throttles wide open, the horizon trembling in the heat haze. The convoy was already zigzagging, its lookouts wary after weeks of phantom attacks. But no one expected the Mosquitoes to strike in broad daylight. Henshaw pulled up to 2,000 feet, lined up his sights, and squeezed the trigger. The Molin's gun thundered, its recoil hammering the airframe. The first 2 rounds splashed wide. The third slammed into the lead ship's midsection, blowing open a cargo hold. Flames poured from the wound, thick black smoke staining the sea. Lang's attack came seconds later, his shells striking the escort ship amidships. The vessel swerved violently, her guns firing blind into the sky. One tracer passed so close that it scorched the Mosquito's left wingtip. Lang pulled hard into a climb, shaking off the flak bursts that followed. Hit confirmed, target crippled. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes. By the time Japanese gunners brought their weapons to bear, the attackers were already retreating south, leaving chaos behind. From 5,000 feet, the crews watched explosions ripple across the convoy, a fiery trail marking the Tsetse's final strike. Back at Fenton, they were greeted not with celebration, but quiet understanding. The ground crew, sunburned and grease-streaked, helped roll the exhausted aircraft into their shelters. One of them, Corporal Tim Ward, ran his hand along the nose of NS-519 and said softly, "You've earned your rest, girl." That evening, Henshaw filled out his final combat report. It ended with a single line: "Cannon operation successful. Target destroyed. No losses." Then, almost as an afterthought, he wrote beneath it, "Recommend aircraft be retired. Structure fatigue beyond safe limit." Within 2 weeks, Japan surrendered. The Tsetse Mosquitoes never flew another combat mission. NS-519 and NS-522 were stripped for parts and eventually scrapped at Darwin, their wooden frames too fragile for post-war transport.
Yet the legend of the Phantom Mosquitoes spread quietly through Allied and Japanese circles alike. Post-war interrogations of Japanese naval officers revealed genuine confusion. Many insisted they had been attacked by multiple heavy bombers firing automatic cannons from impossible range. When shown photographs of the Mosquito Tsetse, several officers reportedly stared in disbelief. "This was the machine?" one said. "We thought it was a myth." At the 1985 Pacific Theater Veterans Reunion in Hawaii, the few surviving Tsetse crewmen met again. Henshaw, white-haired but sharp-eyed, spoke briefly. "We were never heroes, we were technicians, testing something strange, something ahead of its time. But for a while, we were the shadow that frightened ships." The men raised their glasses in silence. Somewhere beyond memory, the wooden ghosts of the Java Sea drifted again, silent, invisible, and unstoppable. Reminders that even in a war of massive fleets and superfortresses, it was sometimes a handful of men in a pair of fragile aircraft who changed the way the enemy feared the sky. When the guns finally fell silent in August 1945, the Mosquito Tsetse disappeared almost as quietly as it had fought. There were no parades, no official decorations, no fanfare.
Its missions remained buried in restricted files, an experiment that had proven far more successful than anyone dared hope, yet too specialized to survive peacetime. For Peter Henshaw, Derek Lang, and the handful of men who'd kept the cannons firing, the war's end felt surreal. The sea lanes they had once haunted were empty now, their enemies defeated not by brute force, but by exhaustion and starvation, the very collapse their tiny squadron had helped hasten. In post-war debriefings, even hardened naval officers admitted the Tsetse strikes had forced Japan to reroute convoys and abandon vital supply runs. A handful of wooden planes had quietly strangled the empire's southern lifeline. In the years that followed, the Mosquito Tsetse became a footnote in aviation history, overshadowed by the jet age and the atomic dawn. Yet among those who knew its story, it remained a symbol of ingenuity and daring. A wooden aircraft that fired a tank gun, operated by men who flew into flak and darkness with nothing but skill and faith in their machine. At the 1962 U.S.-Japanese Aviation History Symposium, a Japanese admiral said it best. "We never feared the largest bombers nor the heaviest ships. We feared what we could not see and what struck before we could shoot back." The Mosquito Tsetse was never meant to be famous, but for a few months in the twilight of the Pacific War, it changed the balance of power with every echo of its 57mm cannon. Proof that courage, innovation, and silence could wound more deeply than any roar of thunder.